And so I think a lot of us know, like, my goal is college, and we have to stay in academic class and not be moved to the pre-sheltered workshop for.
Exactly.
But even beyond that, a lot of kids who go to college, their main struggle is like, I haven't accepted my disability enough to disclose it, to ask for accommodations, to admit when I need help. And those are all super important self-advocacy goals that you're going to need to be successful in college accommodations. So.
And some of those need to be taught. I mean, they really do, because we, many children don't want to speak up or say, oh no, I need this. I've known many of my friends' children who are neurotypical go to college. They need to go to have counseling services, and they're afraid to go ask. Okay, you just go sign up and ask. But those, we have to teach them. They have to be able to know how to advocate for them to get what they want. That you want them to like step into your shoes when they're adults, so that they can ask for what they need and learn how to get what they need in an appropriate manner.
So I just want to add one other thing. I typically, when I have a student that's in their late teens and going on to college or going to be making out, I have a talk with them. I want to have a conversation about, hey, you need to have a mirror and see what's going on with yourself and realize what's happening. What I say to our committees, I say, it's really important, the self-advocacy is important, but one of the things we need to do is develop a partnership with the student. We have a tendency to superimpose accommodations, modifications, etc., but we may not have buy-in. And we need to be sure that the student understands why we're doing it at an appropriate age, of what we're doing, because we'll have a better success if we do. We don't do enough of that. And we need to be sure the school tries to do that with this.
Well, I'm going along those same lines. I've had a kid before where the school will go, well, the accommodations are there as the child needs them. The child won't use them. And then they'll look at me and go, I don't want to use them. Well, I don't believe that child really understands why that we've asked for those accommodations. Okay, you don't want to be different, so you don't want to get a copy of class notes, but here's why you need them. And they will help you to be more successful. So this is your end goal. They are going to assist you in getting here. I think sometimes we just kind of leave that out and go, here, this is what you can get, and this is what you need to ask for. But when they're old enough, let them know why that is important for them to have that and ask for that. So then when they get to college, they're going to go, oh, I do need that, and this is why.
Then you were ashamed because they got Asperger's or disability that they don't know about it. My son, he went to a job and he did not mention anything about, I have Asperger's, because you can tell when he speaks that he doesn't speak real, play like a normal young man.
Right.
And yeah, his communication is good. It's just that, he has to think when he speaks. When he talks and, he needs a lot of training more on job interviewing. Because he got a job at Food Gardens as a second year, but it's just seasonal. And I'm telling you need to work on your communication skills so that way you can go into an interview with confidence and get a full-time job.
Right, and a lot of skills you need to learn. And that's very important. I mean, job interview skills are very important. And I think that's a good part to put in a transition plan, and then you can further it by going, you know what, do social stories, do role playing. When those are done in the right way, they do miraculous things. You can do role playing with teachers, with different people, with you, of him in a job interview going in. Oh, you're not confident because you need to hold yourself up, pull your shoulders back, all that kind of stuff. And they can really learn how to do it and learn it well to where it will benefit. Huh?
We'll teach that in Dodd.
We'll do so. Yeah.
Because he never got called, so we got to go to the Dodd's.
But you can put it too, and why can't you put it in the IEP? You can put anything in there. It's endless. Put it in there and say, somebody needs to work on social skills with them. I want them to do it. They're role playing with them.
One other thing that's important is that's absolutely overlooked. Again, schools have to look at the academic and functional needs of the student. But something that's important for transition beyond, kids with disabilities have a higher propensity to be abused. And we need to make sure that they understand sexual education. and have it at a level that they can understand what an appropriate relationship is and something that's inappropriate. And that should be part of the IEP as well.
What you don't want to do is wait until graduation and then try to figure it all out. That's overwhelming for neurotypical kids. I've seen it. It was overwhelming for me years ago. It's overwhelming for anybody. We don't want them to try to figure it out then. So help them early on in the process. Accommodations and modifications. Those are important to look at and make sure you pay attention to them. They can be a key to keeping your child in a less restrictive environment. If you do have an IEE, then that person can be a great source for what types of recommendations on these that are necessary. Different examples are more time on tests, calculator, scribe, seating near the front, copy of peer or teacher notes, test read to students, shortened assignments. I've seen it as far as, in my son's, we have like, as a accommodation, we have that he can have alternate forms of seating. Right now, he's in this wall that works, but sometimes, you know, and we don't want to keep the same chair. What if something else changes and he needs a different type of chair? So we just have that he can use different alternate forms of seating. I've seen some kids where they say they can walk around the classroom as long as they're not talking and being distracted every 15 minutes. They can walk around for a minute. I've seen some where kids can sit in a chair, can lay on the floor and do stuff. I mean, be creative, figure out how do you work best, you know. When I was in school, I worked best with a quiet environment, but I've known lots of kids who work really good if you put earbuds in and they can listen to some soothing music. You know, I've seen some where they say put on headphones. Any kind of noise can be distracting. I've seen them put folders in front of a chair to keep them from staring at everything around them and focus on what they're doing. So just be creative, and you know your child. You know what they need to learn best.
One thing I want to caution people about is the accommodation for copy of notes. And that's just something I'll refer with the grade students, but we got to be sure that they actually get that skill. Too often they say, oh, we'll just give them the notes. I'm sorry, in business, you're not going to get that accommodation. You're going to have to take notes. Yeah, in college, they'll give you notes, but in business, you're in a meeting, you're not going to get that accommodation. So we really need to be sure that we're teaching them the skill of note taking. It's absolutely essential life skill.
Well, when you look at a copy of notes, make sure the notes are on a level that you can understand. I've seen a copy of notes go back where I would get it as another teacher possibly would get it, but is the child understanding it? And if the child has trouble reading, why are we giving them a copy of notes? They can't read them real well. It's not doing any good. Why not let them audio record the lesson? I've seen that a lot, and they can go home and listen to it over and over and over if they have to. Extended school year, I think we talked about this a lot. I don't know that we need to go back over it. Does anyone have any questions about it? No?
There should be one thing. We're in a due process right now. The extended school year should be determined by duration and frequency. And too often they say it's 4 weeks, that's it. It needs to be individualized for what that student needs. Duration and frequency.
The placement, school is required to consider a continuum of placement for your child from general education with no support all the way to residential. Usually the school will have little boxes you can check that show what the continuum of placements are. And that is fine because you can check the ones you are needing. But like Dorene stated earlier, we've had some where they just leave off residential. And I understand that schools do not want to place residentially. I understand it's a very expensive cost, but it is part of the continuum and parents need to be educated to that. Least restrictive environment is not what many people say it is. Like we talked about earlier, least restrictive environment is what is least restrictive for your child. It may be general ed, but it may also be a resource class. It may also be a life skills class. It may be placement. I have had many cases where I have fought for children to be in a placement facility or in a life skills class, and everybody looks at you like you have lost your mind because you're going, that is his least restrictive environment, and everyone is going, no, no, least restrictive environment is general ed, but it may not be for that child. Prior written notice. Prior written notice is something that you always need to have. It's very important, right, that not many people insist on getting. It's very important to have it. If you request an FIE and they're not going to give it to you, you need to get a prior written notice. If you, at the end of an ARD, you should always have a prior written notice. It will state the action that is being proposed or refused. It will have the reasons for taking the action, and it has to require all procedural safeguards that are available for that child. It also needs to be in the parent's native language or a language that they are it is understandable to the parent, unless it is not feasible to do so. If you have a parent who speaks Mandarin, okay, it may not be feasible to get them a copy of it in Mandarin, but you can certainly get them a tape recording of what it is translated. A lot of times we see this with Spanish-speaking parents, and they're just given a copy of prior written notice in English. That does not work. It also does not work if you are Spanish-speaking and you have this form that's all the form is in Spanish, but everything filled out is in English. That is accomplishing nothing for the parent to understand and doesn't allow them to be an active part of their child's education and developing this IEP. Included with the IEP is staff training. We've talked about this some. If the staff needs training in specific areas of your child's needs, they can be built into your child's IEP. You don't just ignore it like it's not there and they don't need it. If they need specific training and your child requires specific training in an area, advocate for that to occur. A lot can be accomplished through training, and school districts have access to training, so they should be able to accomplish a lot through that. Here are some myths, and I'm going to go through just a couple of them, and then I think we're about hitting time. You must sign your child's IEP while in the ARD meeting. That is not the law. That is not required. You are more than welcome to take the paperwork home. It is a huge packet of paperwork. It is extremely overwhelming to be a parent sitting in there and all these people staring at you. I think I went to one ARD meeting one time where there was like 15 other people. I mean, you walk in and feel like you're walking in ready to be shot. It is just, it's overwhelming. Take the paperwork home, read it at home. You don't understand it, call someone who can help you understand it and sign it when you are ready. Another myth, my child can be expelled from school without receiving any services. Well, if a special needs child can be expelled for weapon, drugs, or serious bodily injury, the school still has to provide educational services. If your child is under a threat of expulsion, that should be a red flag that the IEP is not working appropriately and possibly has not been working for years. That is a big thing I see with the juvenile justice system. I see a lot of kids who come into the juvenile justice system who are receiving special education services, and they are in the juvenile system and been arrested on an offense because their IEP wasn't implemented properly. That is not that child's fault that the IEP wasn't implemented properly. And that is where you need someone who knows both the juvenile justice system and the special education system to make sure you can go back and fix that. Because if not, you're going to get a bunch of children who are in need of special education services in the juvenile justice system, and that's not where they need to be. There's a huge distinction. Another myth, when your child turns 18, he or she will be finished with school and there is nothing you can do about it. That is not correct. There's a lot of ways your child can continue to be involved and make sure your child receives services even up to age 22. And we've had some discussion over that. No one may mention anything to you about it in an ARD meeting, but your child can stay post-graduation. Another myth. If someone at the ARD meeting says something is the law, it must be the law. Not necessarily true. The law is always written, as Dorene has stated, there is no verbal law. If they tell you, well, that's the law, that's all we can do, ask them to show it to you. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, show me where it is. If they cannot show you where it is or point to it or all of a sudden concede the point, then it was not the law. And there's nothing wrong with asking. All they're going to do is say no. Private school students, LEA is supposed to conduct child find activities, evaluate, offer an IEP if the parents rejected the family service plan. They're supposed to offer related services if they need. The downside is they cannot go to a hearing if you disagree with the plan. And that talks more about private schools and that they are supposed to identify for child fines as well. Parent training and education. It's the single best thing you can do to make sure your child receives good services. And Dorene, you have mentioned that, and I think that's very true. If you need help figuring out what you need, you have a child with a disability, you can find good advocates who can help you. If you don't find a good advocate the first time, keep looking. If you need an attorney, you'll be able to find them.
I don't recommend that attorneys go to our meetings. I just think that's overkill.
No, we don't either. We've gone to very few, and I don't think it's necessary. I think it actually ends up hurting more than helping. Here's all of our information. I brought some cards. I'll put them up here. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact any of us. Everyone who presented would be more than helpful, more than willing to talk to you. And let me just start by saying to the parents, thank you, because what you do is a very important job. You know your child better than anyone, and you are your child's biggest advocate. And do not feel bad that sometimes if you cannot figure out what your child needs, going to someone for help is not a bad thing. I've had so many people tell me, well, I just sat in the meeting, I didn't know what they were talking about. And these are very well-educated people who are telling you this and go, I just didn't want to say anything. Well, don't be afraid to say something. You are your child's biggest advocate, and they are going to look to you to figure out how to advocate for themselves. So if you don't know something, don't feel embarrassed. Find an advocate who can help you, a friend who can send you in the right direction, a family member who can help, or go find an attorney who's willing to help and give you some advice. And that's it.
Okay, let's take another 5-minute break, potty break. Our last speaker is Dr. Eskridge, the psychologist. And I'm going to load up her PowerPoint so she can. I need to take my clothes they all stay in here.
Oh my gosh, this is the cutest thumb drive ever. Alright, hopefully it'll stay. Oh, here, yeah, so yeah, keep it out. Sorry, I didn't appreciate it. Sorry. Okay, just gonna have to push out. I don't know how it does that. That's all I could find the other day.
Oh, there we go. All right, so I have to kind of be a contortionist to make this thing happen.
So it should be the only PowerPoint. I took pictures of my kids.
So let's see here. maybe, but truly, I don't know what the kid needs, that's why we have a psychologist, I am not one. So anyway, without further ado, Dr. Laura Eskridge has a presentation for us today on
Okay, so we will see. We've been talking about them all day. So I will try my best not to say something again unless I feel it really needs to be repeated, and I'm going to try this. Oh, there you go. So a couple of things. Yes, I am a licensed psychologist. My actual doctorate is in clinical psychology, so I'm a little odd for the school environment. Oftentimes when you come across doctors in the school environment, many of those may have an EDD or a specialization in school psychology. So I went to the school second after wanting to just work with kids. In addition to the licensed psychologist, I do have the licensed specialist in school psychology, and that is a key factor because when we talk about IEEs, that is something that simply being a licensed psychologist doesn't necessarily give that individual the right to make recommendations in an educational setting. Way back, actually, I was in graduate school in, way back 90s. So I got out of graduate school in like 2003. And right around that time, the school psychologists went to the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists, which is where we have our license, and they basically said we do a special job in the schools, and we should have a special designation so that all just psychologists can't do what we do in the schools. Now, my licensed specialist in school psychology, for you to know, is a master's level position. In the school district, many times you will come in contact with a licensed specialist in school psychology, and it is, unless you're calling them doctor, then it's probably a master's level position. So that's critical to know because that's a 2 to 4 year program versus I took a few years longer than that. I think it's ended at total about 8 years. So getting close to my decade. So those are some interesting or some things that you need to know about that degree that comes into play. My previous work experience, just so that you do know, after my pre-doctoral internship and my postdoc, actually during my pre-doctoral internship, in addition to clinical work in the community, I started working in the schools. After receiving my LSSP in 2006, because you can't be licensed or doing the work there without the LSSP, I did go and work for a large school district in the Houston area and was a licensed specialist in school psychology, the lead LSSP on their autism assessment team. So I fell in love with autism in about 2002. So if you have any questions, I love to talk about kids on the spectrum. And then I also was a lead LSSP for the PPCD, so the preschool program for children with disabilities. So I did evaluations, and that's all I did. I was not a campus LSSP who will often do some counseling. All I did was evaluation for 3 to 21 years of age, which is actually what I do now. So in private practice, I started in 2014, I believe, and I do IEEs all the time. In fact, my goal for next year is to back off just a little bit so that I can do some other things and broaden my own. Well, I need a balance. We'll see. So these are the topics of discussion as we go through. So obviously, an IEE is an independent educational evaluation. The statement is it's by a qualified examiner who is not employed by the public agency responsible for educating your child. I think that's critical. I worked under a public agency for over a decade, and there are expectations when you work for a public agency. So I was recently asked if I had ever while I worked in the public school districts, and while I was not able to give my full response, I have a lot more latitude now in the community to make the recommendations I feel are appropriate for the student, as opposed to what the district is willing to allow or not allow. Now, when you look for an IE, there's 2 things that you're looking at. You're assessing eligibility for services. Without an eligibility, you don't have special education services. So one is to find the proper eligibilities, and we'll talk about that. The second, I think is critical, is we're providing recommendations for services and placement. Sometimes parents come and they're fine with the eligibilities, and I don't have to do a ton of work on that end. But what they're really concerned about is the actual programming that's been put in place for their child. And unfortunately, I see sometimes that we actually have and eligibility, there's oftentimes a thinking of, well, this is the eligibility, so this is your placement, right? We've talked a lot about that today, that placement is really the last thing. But there is kind of a focus in some of the schools that, let's say, if you have an intellectual disability eligibility, that automatically assumes you ought to be in life skills, and that's not necessarily correct. And so one of the jobs of the independent evaluator is to look at the programming and to make sure that it's appropriate for the student, either whether or not it's right on, if it's too hot, too cold, we want to go ahead and say, have you an option to say what we think is appropriate for that student. It's your right as a parent to receive a second opinion. You would not go to a physician who told you had cancer without probably going to get a second opinion. A child with an autism diagnosis, these are not diagnoses, these are conditions that go away. They may improve, and we work toward that, but this is something that will be impacting them forever. So it's critical that you do have a good understanding of your child's strengths and weaknesses, and this is the way to do it. I think that Dorene has emphasized it is critical, and not just necessarily my area. We'll talk, there's IEEs in all different areas, but it is that time for you to get some input into the ARD committee as well. You are supposed to be a valuable member of that ARD committee. If everything is done only by individuals within the school, and you don't have as much say, this is that chance for you to give that a new evaluator, these are my concerns, can we look at this? So those are critical factors when you're in that ARD committee. You want to be able to say, this is what my child needs, and this is what this individual said, and I think that's important. It's also an opportunity to address your concerns with the district's FIE. There's no such thing as a perfect evaluation. I have sadly not ever put out a perfect evaluation. I do try, but I still seem to catch an error at least every time I reread one. But in the districts is not perfect. And we'll talk there may be differences of how to do an evaluation that I think is critical when you're talking about the school versus professionals in the community. And so I think that this is your chance to be able to say, I don't think everything's right, and let's figure out what it is. What an IEE is not. Let me skip over. Okay, so an IEE is not any script from a physician or a diagnosis from a community provider, okay? So oftentimes parents will bring in literally a script that says the child has an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Working in the school is not going to take that seriously. That's one of those things that you have to realize, that's not going to get you an autism eligibility. Because I don't just look at, as a psychologist, I don't just look at the diagnosis. I have to then also look at, does the child need services, in what areas, etc. There's not just one thing. It's also not a replacement for the district's IEE. The district is required to consider, that is the language of the IEE. They're required to consider evaluations that you bring in as a parent, whether you paid for it or the school district paid for it. Please don't anticipate them to just 180 on what they've done. And so I think that you need to realize it will hopefully help to clarify your IEPs and to make a better program for your child. But I have not seen a school district throw out their FIE and say, thank you, Dr. Laura, for your fabulous recommendations. We love you. In fact, no district has ever said that to me. Once I left, my old district used to until I left. Now, the other thing I have to put up here that I didn't have time to do today, IEEs are also not, and this is something we hear, and Dustin's making a comment, it's not a rubber stamp on what you want. My licensure is on the line. I worked really hard for my doctorate. I feed my children with that degree. Parents oftentimes, you have your own opinion as to what you think the diagnosis may be for your child, what you want for recommendations. I am not nice enough to just give a parent everything they want. My job really is to look at the child and see what they need. Sometimes it doesn't, and I'm very upfront with families about that. I will often have some individuals come in and say the school, or occasionally, the school has said my child has autism. I don't think so. Can you do the evaluation? I'll tell parents up front. I will let you know if your child has autism. That is critical if any intervention needs to be started as early as possible. one of those, which I hopefully gives you a good evaluation, but you don't necessarily walk out of the IEE evaluator's office and be like, yeah, I got exactly what I want. Because sometimes I still upset parents. You know, in the schools, it was interesting. I got some parents who loved me and I got some parents who hated me, and that changed daily. But that still happens because my job isn't necessarily to just support you, because if there's something that you need to, that I think the child needs, that's my responsibility too as the independent evaluator to make that recommendation. Yes, ma'am.
If your child is receiving services, would you still need an IEE?
Yes, ma'am. We'll go through some of them, but yes.
Great.
Yeah, I'll go through trying times, but yeah, not necessarily. But yes, it is something you want to still consider. We'll go through hopefully some of those. Okay, considerations for an IEE. Why you might even consider it, okay? Or some things you need to know about an IEE. When is it required? We've gone over this one, okay? So they have the right to inform you. They also have the right, they're responsible to give you a list of providers that can complete the independent educational evaluation, as well as their criteria. And district criteria, their district's criteria does change. Some of them are very similar, but some of them are not, like how far the person can be from the district that they're willing to pay for or not willing to pay for. That seems to come into play frequently. Who can conduct an IEE? So a licensed psychologist, simply a licensed psychologist, isn't necessarily going to be the only the only licensure you need. That licensed specialist in school psychology, I get a lot of calls, not because I'm a licensed psychologist, but because I have that LSSP. Now, a couple of things to know. If you are only an LSSP, you don't get to practice in private practice, okay? LSSPs are really intended, or are only allowed to practice with that license only in the schools. So in order for me to be in private practice, I have to have a secondary licensure in my primary as a licensed psychologist in this respect. So don't just go and pick a psychologist off your list, because they may literally look at it and say thanks. Because a lot of psychologists, what you need to know is they don't do evaluations in the schools. They often don't even go and see your child in the school. The school will not accept an evaluation unless a child has been seen in the school, because what they're going to argue to you is, that's great, but you didn't come see him here during this day. You can't make any recommendations regarding that. So that's critical. That's why the LSSP is an important factor there. Speech language pathologists, OT, BCBAs, and we've talked a little bit about BCBAs, and I mentioned a few more, but they have to. Now, the school district will say they have to have the same licensure. The independent evaluator has to have the same license as the people in the school district. Now, I don't know your area as well, but like up in where I live, there's a school district that has only PhD LSSPs. So only PhD LSSPs are allowed to complete the evaluation. They may have, one school district likes to say the FBAs can only be done by a licensed specialist in school psychology when BCBAs have knowledge, but they won't allow a BCBA in their district to do it. Sometimes that means getting an advocate. Sometimes you have to comply with or go out and get it private paid is another option. Evaluator from the school's list? No. Probably by this point in my life, I'm on school list. I've never put myself on a school list, but I think once they contract with you, I probably am on there, but originally I was not. You can also, you don't necessarily have to use the person on there. You can request somebody to do the evaluation. Then give them the name, and then what they'll do is, usually when that happens, if someone is the first time I've worked with a district, they call me up, they ask me my experience, what licensures do I have, go through all that jazz, which obviously the evaluator should be able to answer if you've done some research instead. We touched on this a little bit before. So when you're looking for an evaluator, I absolutely would recommend that you call the person up in whatever area you're looking for. I'm not going to be a good fit for every parent. Like I said, I don't beat around the bush. So I'm going to pretty much tell you what my thought is, approach for everybody. So you want to talk to me on the phone probably before you invest a lot of time. An independent evaluation, I will tell you, I do psychoeducationals and I do the psychologicals. You're with me and in my office probably 8 hours. Okay, your kid is hanging out with me for 8 hours. So if you don't like me after 2 minutes, 8 hours is going to seem like an eternity, unfortunately. And then, of course, you may not like the report. So you really want to make sure that you have talked to the person who's going to be sitting with your child and making, important decisions before you do that. I have parents come out, I'll call and ask me, and they'll ask me about my experience, or have I done this? Do I know anything about this? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to say you need to find someone who has more experience in that. Because you want the person who knows. If you have a particular diagnosis that you've already received, or I have a lot of people now asking me about dyscalculia. So that's, do you know anything about that? I do, but, so let's talk about it. What are you needing first before we go too far? You talk to the providers. Now, I think okay. Like I mentioned before, can I choose anyone to complete the IEE? No, they have to meet the district's criteria. That's important. So again, the LP, just a licensed psych person, may be awesome, they may be great, but don't waste your $3,000 if the school's going to look at it and say, I appreciate that, but they didn't do any evaluation in school, they didn't talk to the teachers, they literally will say, we really can't do much with that, okay? And please don't waste your time, because if you think about it too from a kid's standpoint, if they're if you've had an FIE done, you're in a psychoeducational, psychological, your kid probably did 6 to 8 hours of testing if it was done well. Okay, maybe 3. No, I'm just kidding. No, so if they did it well, they've already sat down for a lot of testing, okay? Let me finish this real quick, sorry. When they come to me, they don't want to see me because they've seen those booklets come out before where they had to start answering questions. It's not enjoyable. So you want to make sure if you're going to do an evaluation that you're going to be able to show that to the school and say, this is this, and they'll accept it. Yes, sir, sorry.
How the IEEs for that school district and stuff, because you don't use what they hand out to you, and you use somebody from a different district or something like that, and they still don't accept it, then what would you do?
Well, and that's where you get your advocates and Dorene and Jackie and Holly involved, unfortunately. Because really what I've seen the kind of the gamut. I did an IEE, totally appreciate that. I'm not going to use a stitch of it. We're not changing the behavior. We're not changing our recommendations. We're not changing our program. The school district checked off their box and then changed nothing. So I've seen that, unfortunately. I've seen the other end too, where thank you for the IEE. There's some good recommendations. Let's work together and develop a better program for the child. That's really what you would like to see. But if you're unfortunately in the first category, then our other experts come into play. And that's more where your mediation comes involved, and if you have to due process. So have any of y'all, I mean, besides the attorneys in here, of course, anyone ever been in due process? And advocates, y'all keep your hands. Okay, it's not fun, right? Like, no, it really isn't. So before this happened, I was never in due process. Now in private practice, I've been involved a few times. Every time I leave everyone will tell you here, I think, what just happened? Well, I hated that. I got to switch jobs. It takes me about 3 days to go back to, no, I really do like my job. I really do like the kids that I help. It just really is not a pleasant experience. And Dorene, I think, likes it. So I don't know if
that's probably a diagnosable condition.
But she's really good at it, so it's okay. Am I guaranteed the evaluator I choose if he or she meets the district criteria? I'm gonna be real honest with you, no. Okay, so even if they're an LSSP, I get districts who will call me up and say, this is our fee, will you accept it? And sometimes, even though I really love my job, I have to say no, because you really are far off. So you have to realize some districts are only willing to pay so much, and some of them really are off on their fees. So that could be a critical factor. Some of them, I live too far from some of them. I'm outside, I think it's usually like 100-mile radius or something. I often see, I go to Beaumont, that's outside my 100-mile radius. And some districts will allow it and some districts don't, and then it requires more push from behind. So, and I have seen a girlfriend of mine who's a BCBA that is great on every case, but she's unfortunately had to say no to a lot of evaluations because of difficulties with the schools and some of the things. So this unfortunately is not where I'd like to see it. Are they required to give me an IEE? No, and we had that, y'all had that discussion today, so I won't go for that. Who pays for the IEE? So you can go outside and get your own IEE. Again, if you're going to seek an IEE and privately pay for it, make sure it meets the school's criteria so you're not wasting your money. The other option is the school can pay for it, and again, you just have to stay within the guidelines. With the exception of like the fees, I've never had any problem with my degrees, but you just have to make sure because, you know, if they may have something special, you know, depending on what's going on. I don't know, I agree. Again, we talked about this, Jackie just talked about it a minute ago. You are not required to give the art committee reasons for your IE request. They will ask you repeatedly, but you don't have to. So that is your right. In what areas? So, okay, so the FIE, actually let me do this one first on those. I think it might be the next slide or coming up. We'll talk about this, so in what areas? This one I thought is interesting, and I got in trouble sort of for this one, but if I'm concerned about autism but the district hasn't evaluated, can the independent evaluator assess in that area? So the answer here is yes. There is is it OSEP, Lewis? What is it, the OCR? About the the independent evaluator can assess even if the district didn't. Yeah. Okay. Just that. So there's a letter that basically says, so if your district and part of the FIE did a psychological, really, if you do a psychological well, you should be looking at it all. The districts occasionally like to be like, well, we don't see any autism characteristics, so we're not assessing for autism. Really, in my opinion, if you're doing a psychological, you should be looking for autism, you should be looking for emotional disturbance, you should be looking for ADHD, Tourette's, OCD. That's the psychologist's job, is to look at everything. And that may just be the way that I have been trained. I feel like it's top down for me. But there are districts who often will say, we're only going to evaluate for ADHD and we're only going to evaluate for speech and language or whatever it may be. Well, you have concerns as the parent about autism and they don't do it. That doesn't keep you from getting the independent evaluator to look at it. Now, again, occasionally we get in trouble for that and we get our hands slapped, but I don't care, so there you go. We can look at it, because I get parents who come in and they're like, I've asked for it for years. I really think he has autism. Well, as a psychologist, I'm sorry, I have an ethical responsibility. I'm gonna look at it, okay? We don't put bounds on that. Okay, so we'll go back to the areas in a minute, but so things you need to know. What is the reason that we have an FIE? We've talked about some of these today, so I'll zip through when we can. And therefore, why would I need an IE? Okay, so let's think about why we need it. The FIE really is to determine whether or not the child has a disability and in what area. Okay, there are 13 areas in which a child can have a disability. So we need to know what is the disability, and even though that doesn't necessarily drive the programming, they do have things that come along with it. Autism, you have an autism supplement. I will say, in some cases you can do an autism supplement even if the student isn't on the autism spectrum. So, but you know, we need to know what our disability is. Reason, because if you don't have a disability, then you don't need special education services. Again, this community-based diagnosis does not always equate to special education disability or eligibility. In order for a student to receive special education services, they have to have a disability and a need for specialized instruction and related services. So if you have ADHD or your child has ADHD and they're properly medicated, you may not be receiving services, or they may not recommend services because you don't necessarily need them. However, if you have a child who has ADHD, you can't seem to get the meds right, you choose not to do medication, and they're having a lot of behavioral and academic problems as a result of it, then you have the disability plus the need for specialized services, possibly. So these both have to be met in order for an actual eligibility to be recommended. Okay, and again, the community-based assessments don't always meet standards for educational assessment. Although, you have to think about it, we may exceed in many respects, but you still have to meet their criteria of, you have to see the kid in school. You need to talk to the teachers or get some information from the teachers. So those are critical components of a school-based evaluation that you want to make sure is done. The class, we talked a bit about this today. I don't think I can overstate. When I was in the schools, I think I underestimated the class. But I think now, it's usually at the front of the ARD. That class is essential. Because what they talked about before was it has your child's strengths, which we have to use to address their needs, and we have their needs. And when we've got those needs documented, then you should have an IEP in that area, okay? The whole point of the FIE is to drive the IEPs and the planning. You need to find out in the FIE what are their strengths and weaknesses. But then beyond that, you gotta get them documented, okay? You need them written down so that everybody understands. And what that usually means for that class is compiling all that information from multiple people. You know, a child is a complex little creature some days. You've got your IQ, right? That impacts us. Personality characteristics, do I have anxiety? Do I have ADHD? Do I have autism? So then I need a psych person. I need to look at sensory processing issues. Sensory processing issues are huge. I think they're probably, if you think about it, they're at the base of the triangle. Okay, if your sensory processing needs aren't taken care of, you can't learn in the academic environment. If your behaviors aren't taken care of, you can't learn in the academic environment. So those things are critical. So an occupational therapist really is critical to, if we are suspecting sensory issues, we need them to evaluate. That needs to go in that class. If your kid needs to get up every few minutes and go walk around, this has been torture for me today. I love listening to everybody, but I am not a sitter. And I had just tried my best to not look totally today, but normally in an environment like this, if it was a bit larger, I would be up at the back, bouncing up and down or walking around. I have a very hard time sitting still. I didn't have an educational plan, but I have to learn to do that. And if that's what's needed for your child, that needs to be written in there underneath. Those are critical things to be paying attention to. This class is, just don't overlook it. And the schools, I think, try to. Like, they try to kind of just put as few, things as they need to know. This is your guide for your IEPs. Don't let it pass you by. Okay, and this is the programming for your child. One of the things I think is a good thing for an IEP is I have done a lot now in smaller school districts. I don't know what school districts are you? I guess everyone's from around this area, kind of. So mostly. Okay, so I had experience in larger school districts, and so I knew what was available to me. But as you go into a smaller school district, maybe some of the education that has been what would be considered just typical in my old school district hasn't necessarily trickled down. So when an independent evaluator comes in, hopefully we're up to date on interventions, and we can come in and say, guys are doing great in here, but we need this kind of intervention, that ABA approach or whatever's going on that maybe no one has a clue about. That's where that independent evaluator can really help with programming. And I've seen both ends of it. I get some parents who say my child needs more restrictive. I get the other end where they say they need less restrictive. And again, you have to look at that continuum. Okay, let's see. Okay, so does everyone knows these eligibility criteria. Now, I will have to say one thing I wanted to say, or I kept to myself earlier. So one thing with autism I think is important to know, and unfortunately seems to be becoming more of an issue for our kids, is you cannot have autism if you have a primary disability of emotional disturbance. Okay, so if your emotional disturbance is what's driving your behavior, you can't have autism secondary. However, you can have the reverse. Okay, you can have a child with autism first. Now, and I need you guys to remember, autism in the DSM, so the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. It's where those of us geeks up here trying to diagnose and to come up with this, diagnosis for people. But it has all the criteria, what needs to be, what is an autism spectrum disorder, etc. Autism is categorized as a developmental disability. You do not acquire autism at 16 unless you potentially have a traumatic brain injury and your behaviors change. You are born with that. Okay, you will see in infant studies Nowadays, I think we can get down to as early as 10 months. We've got some good stuff saying we can identify some of the early characteristics of autism. So you are born into this world with these characteristics, which means it colors everything in your world from the get-go. You aren't kids a lot of times looking where other people are looking is a critical skill. So if you're looking down at your watch and I'm thinking, I know what she's thinking, she's checking her time. Oh my gosh, how much longer do I have to listen to this woman, right? So that's a critical factor. Infants, a lot of times with autism, don't do that at 12 months of age. So this is a developmental disability. You can have an emotional disturbance secondary to autism, okay? And unfortunately, many of our teenagers, they hit middle school, their anxiety that would be normally associated or we see with the autism spectrum goes out of whack, and it gets to the point where it's a significant factor, depression. We unfortunately have a lot of difficulties at the start in those ages. Unfortunately, many of our kids are bullied, not just with autism, and so that lays on a whole other layer. So you can have autism first and emotional disturbance secondary, and unfortunately, like I kind of alluded to earlier, I'm seeing more of it. So I'm not exactly sure why, but I think that's critical. And in that case, you want to have the right eligibilities so that you know what core factors you're addressing, but also you want to make sure you're addressing the anxiety that might go on with the depression, etc.
Does it matter which one goes first on?
Has to be, well, yeah. So you can't have ED-AU. You can have AU-ED.
My
Okay.
son has a chromosome disorder, he has an extra Y.
Mhm.
I can't remember which one. Dorene is my good work. If it's autism first or chromosome, or OHI, it's OHI.
Yeah.
It's chromosome.
Yeah.
So would that matter?
No, that's okay. If for some reason it's only the emotional disturbance and the autism, but those two together are fine. You know, I do as an evaluator try to put what I consider to be primary, secondary, and tertiary, or however many we have to go back. But no, in that case, it's fine. It's not going to impact it. Okay, so when you're looking at your FIE, what do we want to see for a good evaluation? Now, Pat and Lewis sent me some notes, and we may differ on the school districts on what constitutes a good evaluation. But I'm going to tell you what I think is a good evaluation, and then we'll go from there. One, it has to be conducted by professionals competent in the areas for assessment, okay? There's a reason that we're licensed by the state of Texas. I have to prove that I know what I'm doing. But I will tell you, we're not all the same, okay? Like I used to tell people, you get 10 of us in a room and you might have 10 different diagnoses, which is a slam on my own profession, but we don't see things the same. We don't interact the same. I've seen people who, I love kids with autism. I enjoy them, so I'm down on their level and we get each other. We have our moments. Other people are not an autism-friendly evaluator, right? You've seen them. I don't know if you have kids with autism or not, but there's some that you sometimes can even see like one of these. You know, and you're like, hey, that's not the person you're going to. We just aren't, we aren't all trained. I have spent, I guess, since 2002, how many years is that? 15 years in autism, and I've amassed, I can always amass more, but I try to amass information in that area. But that doesn't mean that another psychologist that you come into has even met a child with autism, okay? So you need to realize we're not all the same. You gotta talk with the person evaluating. And you can do that, and I don't think that makes you a difficult parent, but do ask them, you know, how many kids have you seen on the spectrum? Or this is a diagnosis I got from the outside provider. Do you have any experience with that? If we're competent and we're self-assured, we'll tell you whether we're good or not in that area. And if not, then maybe see if you can have an evaluator. In some school districts, autism, where I was at, was a specialty. It's a larger team now, but there were 3 or 4 of us as psychologists on that team, LSSPs, excuse me. We were considered specialized. No one at the campus did autism evaluations because they didn't have the same level of training. Different school districts have all the LSSPs do autism assessments, okay? That means everyone's supposed to be an expert. So you need to realize that that's not always the case. Speech language pathologist, okay? So you're looking at pragmatic language, receptive expressive language. You have to have here in the state of Texas, most of them are C's. They have their C's as well. So educational diagnosticians, again, that's a master's level, can be just a master's level licensure or experience, but those tend to do intellectual and academic achievement. And it's interesting too, every school district is different. Some LSSPs do all the IQ and achievement in one school district, and others are educational diagnosticians, so it really can vary. Occupational therapists, board certified behavior analysts. This is as you hear, some people saying that these aren't, board certified behavior analysts are kind of new to the education game. And I think they scare some people in the field, or in the schools. And, but I think they're critical to have. And I think when we look at the FBA, I'm going to backtrack and say something about the FBAs and BIPs. Not a lot of BCBAs are employed in the schools, okay? So a lot of the time, the teacher is doing an FBA. I've seen that, where the special education teacher does the FBA. I've seen it where the licensed specialist in school psychology does the FBA. Now, I'm an LSSP. I have a certain level of training. I can do an FBA, okay? But I would bet you, if you look at the FBA often that's in your FIE, it's very different than what a BCBA would do. These people are crazy weird when it comes to data collection, and I am telling you, they love it. It's overwhelming for me sometimes, and they get giddy about it. So they want to know exactly how many times your child did this, and they count this. But oftentimes, when you look in the FIE that your district did, there's no data. There's no counting of times that your child did it. Oftentimes, they'll simply say, well, I hypothesize that this is the reason that the child is doing this. Okay, so we want to find out what the reason for the behavior is. So when you do that, take it with a grain of salt and realize this BCBA, FBA, if you can get it, is going to probably, hopefully, and again, they all have their strengths and weaknesses too, be much better than what you get in the school environment. And that's just, unfortunately, one of those. Now, some are done by BCBAs, some are done by LSSPs who do the data collection. But you do need to have someone help you through it, because sometimes it's a paragraph. If an FBA is a paragraph, it's not done well. I'm just going to tell you that now. So, all right. A good evaluation is individualized to the child on the strength and looks at their strengths and needs. The Woodcock-Johnson, when we look at IQ and achievement, although I'm seeing some change in the schools, but for the longest time, when we started doing certain specific learning disability evaluations, the Woodcock-Johnson was like the be-all and end-all, because it covers all areas of IQ that we have to look at, etc. So basically what would happen is, if I got a report from the school district, it had the Woodcock-Johnson. That's not individualized to the child. There's more than one IQ measure out there. We have the KABC, we have the WISC, we have all these great measures. Some that are better for kids with a disability or a specific disability or not. But if everyone gets the Woodcock-Johnson, then that's not individualized to your child's needs, okay? Especially if your child's nonverbal, because the Woodcock-Johnson is very loaded on language. So it's probably going to show that your child doesn't have as many capabilities as they actually do. So it needs to be taken, you need to think about what it's doing. You need to find out what they're good at and what they're not good at, okay? That's really, but it needs to be focused on that child, not just in this district, this is what we do, okay? If that's the approach, then you're missing something. They also look at special education related services, which we talked a little bit about. There's a ton of related services. Like we had mentioned, counseling as a related service today, which since I'm a psychologist, I think sometimes is really I don't know how to do that. And we have two, you have to realize IQ with munchkins, little bitty ones, you know, you gotta take that with a grain of salt. So realize that those are not, we've had, you know, some of those suspensions. You know, you give a 5-year-old who's nonverbal at the time an IQ measure and then try to say that they're intellectually disabled, that's not right, because you got to look at a whole host of other issues. And IQ is really supposed to be stable over time. So that's an important factor as well. These are the areas.
Okay, so what if a district only offers one IQ test? But you know that IQ test is not appropriate for the child. How do they get other ones? Do you buy it? Do they buy it?
No, they buy it.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking, because
I've never heard of only one IQ test in the city.
And so I was asking how that would work.
Yeah.
If they're saying
Technically,
this.
Yeah, I would hope that the school district would not take that approach because there's strengths and weaknesses to each test. So I would hope that they have multiple measures. And no offense, like today I do my WISC on an iPad. So I don't even have to buy the actual WISC, it's $1,000, but I don't have to do that anymore because I have an iPad. So there's so many that are like that. You know, there's more like that now. Or you can get an IEE, but no, don't, yeah, these things are not cheap.
That's what I was wondering, because I've never heard that before. I was like, oh, let me ask.
No, yeah, you have to have more than one. You have to have more than one IQ measure. I have more than one IQ measure. I got probably 4, and I'm just by myself. So, okay, so these are the areas that are covered in the FIE. So these are also the areas you can ask for an IEE. Okay, now here's the thing that we haven't said about IEEs today. You get 1 per area that the district does. Okay, so let's take my areas, emotional behavioral. Okay, your district does the FIE and they look at emotional behavioral, you disagree. Okay, so you're allowed to ask, Dr. Laura, come see me. I want you to do an evaluation on my kids, right? So I give you that IEE. Remember I told you you need to make sure you like that person, okay? Because guess what? You don't get another one until the school district does their evaluation again, which I'm gonna assure you is gonna be 3 years, probably. So you wanna use it, but realize, do it judiciously because you don't get to have, well, I don't like Dr. Laura's opinion, let me get a third opinion. You don't get a third opinion, okay? But you can ask for an IEE in all of these areas. If they did language, you ask for it in language if you feel like it needs to be done. Physical motor, OT, emotional behavioral, intellectual and adaptive, those generally go together with the education. But you can ask those in all of those areas. So literally, I have parents come into me and say, I've got 5 IEEs outstanding. Okay, so poor kid, but okay, then we gotta wait and we wanna see all the information, but you can't have one in each area. I know some people who request them in each area all the time.
For autistic kids, are there certain ones that you should focus on?
Yes, so and I have a slide, but I'll tell you now. So for sure, emotion behavioral, because that's where the autism eligibility comes from. So that's, you have to do emotion behavioral. Now, in IEEs, I'll mention this here. It's called the gold standard. It's considered the gold standard. It's called the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. Oh, some school districts have it and they use it well. Some school districts don't use it at all. An independent evaluator ought to be using it. I occasionally may choose not to do it if I've got a classic diagnosis of autism that's been around and we've known since the kid was young. But that is you want to look at social and emotional reciprocity, and that's a good measure for that. So make sure your independent evaluator does it. You want intellectual, academic, and adaptive behavior with a kid with an autism diagnosis or a suspected autism diagnosis, because you've got the whole gamut. We've got kids who are intellectually disabled on the autism spectrum. We have 150 IQ. And the services and the accommodations and how you approach that child is vastly different. You want language. I tell you what, and when you look at language, look at pragmatic language. I am a big proponent of, so language is expressive, receptive, so receptive is what you understand, expressive what you say, pragmatic is your social language. How do you start a conversation? Can you maintain a conversation? Do you do what I'm doing to you right now and I'm monologuing and I'm just, verbal vomit on you? Okay, if you do that in a social interaction, people don't want to be around you, right? So that's important, is that pragmatic language in that factor. So those are is your child on the spectrum? No. You said, oh, you did. You said yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I would definitely look at all of those areas. Physical motor you may as well, because of sensory assistive technology you may as well. you may need to as well.
So the poor kid, fine.
Yeah, you spread them out.
More,
Spread them out and use reinforcers. Yeah.
more, I think we ought to address the question that you and I talked about the other day. In the event that there was, let's say, a student of autism, but instead it looks like they're more stuff like the social disorder, and what they should do about that.
Yeah. So when the DSM has been out for a long time, and we've gone through different revisions. When the last revision, the 5 came out, autism changed up big time. So in DSM-4, we had autism, what was called pervasive developmental disorder. We had Asperger's disorder, which tends to be individuals that have average to above average language, IQ, but who have social awkwardness and difficulties. So when they changed the DSM-5, they lumped all of those under autism spectrum disorder. So everyone who used to be Asperger's, PDD, autistic disorder, now have one category. Well, they also added a category called social communication disorder, which basically, if you think about it, is what I would say is the social and language, pragmatic language aspects of autism. Have any of the what we call cluster B symptoms of autism. So no repetitive movements, no major sensory issues. I say major. No stereotyped behaviors or routines, difficulty with change routine, and no echolalia, repetitive language. So kids with autism have social concerns, you have to meet those, and then they have to have a couple of these other kind of atypical behaviors. Well, the social communication disorder is just the social stuff. They may not be able to hold a conversation, they may have, restricted interest, sorry, goes back to autism, but so they may not understand inferencing and figurative language. Well, in the districts now, we have parents who get this diagnosis, but we don't have a clue where it goes. Actually, we know where it goes. The districts don't seem to know where it goes. And one of the things is if you have a concern about like a social pragmatic language disorder, it really does fall under the speech language pathologist. Okay, so that's a real critical factor. Is that what you, now, under this pragmatic language, a pragmatic language assessment, if when you're looking for an SLP, ask them what they do for pragmatic language, because there's ways to assess pragmatic language, and there's ways to assess everything. You want parent information, you want observation, you want teacher information, you want to review records, that can take hours, but you also want to test. Okay? I mean, the whole point is we want to see how the kid performs, and there's pragmatic language tests that are awesome. That can say, okay, does the child have difficulty with inferencing, understanding other people's thoughts and feelings? Do they not get it's raining cats and dogs? I mean, have any of you had a kid, you literally said it's raining cats and dogs, and they looked up in the sky and thought, oh my God, it's going to hit me. Okay, that's a clue that we might want to look at pragmatic language, unless they're like 3. Okay, but that's something you want. When a 12-year-old looks at you and is like, okay, whoa, okay, because we use figurative language and inferencing all the time. If you want your child, whether it's on autism or not, to understand and comprehend what they read, they have to be able to inference. They have to be able to put themselves in other people's thoughts and feelings and understand someone else's perspective. Those are critical factors. Sorry, is that, okay. Okay, a good evaluation also reviews the evaluation, existing data, and then uses sound instruments. You should not have an evaluator who has a measure that's 2 years old. Why? Because that's unethical. So they need to be kept up to date on what's going on. Parents and teachers, you ought to be getting some fill out that you hate them. They're like 400 questions. I know you hate them, but they really do provide good information to us. In addition to just your verbal conversation with the evaluator. Now, I will say here, I'm going to make this point, Pat left, but so it does seem that there's some education toward LSSPs in the Houston area. It sounds like a lot of reliance on reviewing existing data, reviewing your grades, reviewing teacher main tests, reviewing the STAR, and utilizing that as the core for an assessment. To be good, then maybe we don't need to actually do these individually administered tests. But I can tell you from another due process, a lot of times those scores, kids are passing. How is that? How does this kid have like a 90, right? This kid is failing every day, coming home, can't do the homework, but somehow they're making these beautiful grades. Or they were allowed the STAR with such accommodations.
It's a due process miracle.
I know, man, it's like, for goodness sake. But you need to realize sometimes we need that test data, because if you don't necessarily know where all that data is coming from. You don't know what that went into that grade. Does that hearing officer know that that 90 was there because it was the fourth time the child tried to do that assignment, or it was given the opportunity to do it? No. Does that go into it? So you need to make sure that they've got some test data, not just review of records and everything, and their their grades. We do use a lot of observations interviews. If you have someone important in your child's life, tell the evaluator at school or the independent evaluator, if you've got your child who has been in ABA therapy since they were 5, I want to talk to that person. They're going to know a lot about your child. And I can ask them sometimes questions that I can't ask you. Or a therapist. I got people who are in counseling with kids. I want to know their opinion too, because they've seen the kid, let's say even 6 months more than I've seen the kid. I get to see the kid on 2 days. I want other people's opinions as well. Okay. I'm not going to do too much of that. Okay, so request an IEE if you disagree with the eligibility. Now, it's a ballot. So Dorene did say earlier that you don't necessarily want to go to due process over the eligibility. Totally true, I get it. Get an independent evaluation you paid for privately. But having said that, I'm a firm believer in having the correct eligibilities on the record. And I'll tell you, MDRs were mentioned today, okay? We've had cases where they've gone literally DSM diagnosis point by point, and if that behavior wasn't accounted for by the eligibility of, let's say, ADHD or OHI, they were sent off to, punishment, consequence, because it wasn't on there. Well, if you have a kid who has autism and emotional disturbance, you need to know those things, because that's a different kid than just a kid with autism. A kid with autism and ADHD is different from just an ADHD kid. So yes, you need to balance it. I don't want you fighting any more than you have to, but you do want to make sure that the eligibilities are correct and that they truly do understand your child's needs. Now, if you can get all of the services your child needs and they're meeting all those needs with IEPs, then maybe it's not as critical, but you need to kind of weigh that. You disagree with the services, placements, or accommodations, okay? I have had more than one parent come to me and say, child for what we call ABS West and East, these more structured, off-site campuses. When I go in and I'm like, the kid's in gen ed, okay, with maybe a little paraprofessional support, and they want to move them from gen ed with paraprofessional support to ABS. What what happened to the whole continuum in the middle? And sometimes, unfortunately, I think schools just that's how they want to handle it. Well, that's where sometimes the independent evaluator has to come in and say, hold on, wait, let's try all these other things in between, so that we can see if there's success with that first. So if you disagree with those placements or services, I do get called in for they want to send them out to no one's ever said unless I'm a residential though, and not, okay. If you don't believe that evaluator had adequate training, I had one mom who just came to me the other day, and she happened to be an LSSP herself, and said to me, the educational diagnostician who just did my child's evaluation is fresh out of school. Okay, I don't think she knew some of these instruments. I asked her what she thought of these instruments, wasn't able to really discuss the differences amongst them, what was best for my child. So one of her reasons for coming is she just felt like that person didn't have sufficient training. And of course, they come out with an intellectual disability. That's one thing we want to make sure we get correct, okay? So that's why mom came to me on that one. If you think everything was not evaluated, so when we talked earlier, autism, you want to look at all of these for autism. Now, having said that, I've tried to put others here. Expressive language, receptive, pragmatic, social skills. Oh, that's huge, okay? Our kids need help with social skills. They do not inherently pick it up from watching other kids, or they probably wouldn't be on the autism spectrum. So you need to assess where are their social skills at, and what do we need to do to intervene with them appropriately. You obviously want to look at ASD characteristics and the severity of those. We have not mentioned executive functioning today, and Lewis is going to be really upset if I finish this without mentioning it. Executive functioning is critical, okay? You guys, your frontal lobe, this part up here, protect it, please, because that's important. But this is where you plan. This is where you make long-term goals, short-term goals. My executive functioning weaknesses over the years have been, I spit it out and then realize, oh, you know, that was probably not a good thing to say right to that person. I at least had the ability to read facial expressions, so I caught that I really was not doing the right thing. But that took me a while to learn to, I mean, I was in graduate school, my girlfriend said to me, you should have kept that one in your mouth. And I was like, no, I'll try it next time. So we all have these weaknesses, but they need to be looked at, okay? Organization, someone mentioned organization earlier. That's critical. If we need to teach your child how to study, you can have a study skills IEP, and that's great. How do we keep a calendar, okay? We have to learn how to do to-do lists if we're ADHD or something else. And then again, the FBA, and I told you get a good one. ADHD, okay? ADHD kids have social skills deficits. That is not a only thing that we look at for autism. Kids with ADHD are also a couple years behind. Now, the difference between autism and ADHD, autism, you don't know how to implement the skill. You don't get it. ADHD, you probably know how to implement the skill, but you're impulsive, and so you're doing it when you shouldn't be. So we have to teach them a different method to improve their social skills. Here in autism, we may have to teach you the rule. ADHD, you know the rule. We just have to teach you to use your executive function skills and say, stop, think before I say something. And of course, behavior here as well is critical. Now, emotional disturbance, I put all of those under there as well. And SLD, specific learning disability, please look at executive. Make sure they look at executive functioning. There's various ways. There's parent and teacher rated measures, which I think they're getting, better at. But there's also measures that we can then put the child through. And I'm looking at, there's new ones all the time. There's now neurofeedback. I mean, we've got some good stuff coming up with ADHD. Because ADHD is one of these, and learning disabilities. Executive functions can impact all of these. With ADHD, I get this, they can't do anything because of all the deficits. You're impulsive, so then you probably, let's say you're not good at school. You know, you're not good at reading, not because you can't read, but because you're impulsive. What? You know, so you gotta look at really, and ADHD can present, or you can, that was my original thought, sorry. ADHD can look like a whole host of things, and the opposite is true. A specific learning disability can look just like ADHD, okay? And to the untrained eye, and you got your teacher coming at you saying, I think you need an ADHD evaluation, find someone who knows what they're doing, because I got kids who have diagnoses and are medicated for ADHD. I had one the other day. ADHD diagnosis, unmedicated when he comes to me, right? So I'm expecting, like Carday, this kid sat there and worked with me for, and we take breaks, but hours. And I looked at his mom and said, I don't think it's ADHD. I think it's this dyslexia plus some sensory issues. Now that's a big thing because mom's spending $700 a month on medication because she doesn't have insurance. Okay, $700 worth of medication that may not be doing anything for her child. That's important. Real quickly, outliers were not explained. This is another thing that I saw recently. Yes, you want convergence of data, but if you've got a really low score on something, I want to know why. Okay, the kid wasn't paying attention. Did I not administer the test correctly? They need to be able to sufficiently explain to you why your kid did poorly on this. Okay. Structured and unstructured observations. If you are looking at a child, especially with an autism or suspected autism, you want to see them structured in class, but also unstructured. Playtime, recess, back to in middle school. Those kinds of things are critical, okay? Because observations can tell you a lot. If I'm doing my job really well, I can go to the grocery store with me. I know who's on the spectrum and who's not, okay? So, and I keep it to myself. See, I've learned some executive functions, but I do know, and I can see that those observations are critical. This one, if your test results all of a sudden differ significantly, if your kid went from having a 90 IQ to a 70 IQ in 2 years, please get a second opinion. Because I've had parents who come to me and said they've had outside evaluations and their child was labeled or eligible as learning disability. All of a sudden, ID. He's intellectually disabled. What? You didn't have, and then what happened in that case, the evaluator didn't have a good relationship and the kid just shut down. Okay, that's not ID, that's a bad relationship. The child in the report doesn't match the kid you know. If you read that report and you think, that's not my kid, okay, because that's your kid. You know him or her better than any of us ever will, okay? One disability accounts for everything documented, okay? If the evaluator comes back and says everything that they found wrong was because your kid has ADHD, that's a problem. Okay, you don't have reading disabilities because you have ADHD always. Okay, they can, but you don't necessarily have, I don't know, I get this frequently, it's usually with LDs. I get LDs, it's not really a learning disability, it's because your kid has ADHD. Okay, well, they can actually be comorbid. You can actually have both diagnoses at the same time. If your examiner can't answer all your questions, if they start shutting you down or doing a circumlocution, where you're going all the way around the point and they can't hit it, that's a red flag. Okay, come and find someone else. And if I can't answer it, then it was a bad question in the first place. Overabundance of support from the school base. Okay, if everything is, well, his grades are fine, he's passing, you know, he's doing all that. If that's what they stop at, then you may want to question further something else. Sorry. Yes, sir.
So, what I have is this, that the child's not making progress.
Yes, and that's one thing we did today, and I thank you, because I wanted to mention that. IEPs, you guys. Dorene mentioned this morning that you should be getting your IEP progress notes on a regular interval. Please keep those, okay? If you send me 2 years worth of IEP reports, I will look at them. Because parents often will come and say to me, he's just not making progress. And if they've had the same IEP for 2 years and we're still at 50%, there's something wrong. But I get to use that, okay? Because I've written in a report before, I love it, it makes me happy. I've written in a report before, this child has not made progress on an IEP that they've had for 2 years. When Dorene goes to court and she, you know, it's like, okay, seriously, you've done nothing for 2 years and the kid's made no progress. That's a problem because education is to make progress, okay? And now we're expecting more of it, but, you know, I think that's critical. Yes? All right, I know I talked a while and probably fast. Any questions?
So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My daughter had the educational portion of the assessment by the school done.
Okay.
And they said that her grades were too high and therefore she did not qualify for LSSP, even though she's got
SLD?
no, the LSSP part of the testing. They wouldn't do it because her grades are too high.
So they wouldn't assess the emotional and behavioral because she had good grades?
Yeah.
Okay, so this goes back to what Dorene and we've had several times said today. Educational need is not only academics. That is, and you need to say to them, at least this is my recommendation, educational need incorporates academics, emotional, behavioral, social functioning. All of those need to be looked at. So that's,
They said that there was a 2-part process, that they had to have an identified problem and it had to affect their academic progress. And if she had good, she's in first grade.
but academic progress is social, emotional, behavioral, and academic. Okay,
So-
get them out social, yeah.
So what we're doing right now is getting an independent evaluation because we have it through our insurance. I was able to,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Although I tell,
With your insurance, are they going to do an observation?
yeah, and
I doubt
that's,
it.
yeah, so that's where,
Especially because they're disputing the education.
Yeah.
you want one of
This is
those.
going to be the part that you're going to need to tell us.
Right, and you're going to do it on the basis of the medical need.
Right.
versus
Right,
education.
right. Yeah, so,
Well,
yeah, you may want to revisit that or ask them if they have someone in your office who can do the educational portion, you know, do an observation at the school, review the school records, that sort of thing. But yeah, if it's just a medical,
Yeah.
you're gonna go, thanks, that's great, so we'll put that in the file.
Yeah.
And you need to get the school to pay for it.
Yeah. And you can ask for that. And what we mentioned earlier, I know they don't give you a list, but normally most schools will have, they now have their own forms. So they'll say you have to fill this out and turn it in. But do that because you're right, they won't. And really, Dorene is the only attorney who's ever gotten me in. Like if a parent comes to me and says I need to do, or we're in the middle of, I need to do an IEE. If it's not paid for by the school, she's the only reason I've ever gotten into observe because they will stonewall you. So even if your doctor wanted to go, what we hear is, oh, I'm so sorry, we have other kids, it's confidentiality issue, you can't come in and observe. I've gotten that, and Dorene has to get me in, I have to ask, can you get me in? You know, so I can see the kid. But so they're gonna hit resistance, find an LSSP who can do it.
Yeah, but usually in that scenario where it's part of due process, you have an absolute right to have your expert
Yeah.
observe, see your child in school. So
Yeah.
that should be under that, and you can do like a motion, or is it a motion to compel them to do
Yeah, because I've gotten nowhere, like.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that you have to do that, but
Yeah.
it's fine, we'll go through that.
Well, they want to play by default.
Well, you know, if they're proud of their program, they should be happy to have you come see it.
I agree. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know it, when you talk to a child and you do all that, do you know which school district that you're gonna be dealing with? And does that temper your expectations, like small versus large versus?
No, I expect them all to do the right thing. So no, I do, yes. If it's a public paid IEE, I have to actually contract with the school. So the school has to call me, say, here's my whatever, here's what I'm willing to pay you. I agree, and we sign a contract. So my contract is actually with the school. Like parents will often ask me, can I have the report? Technically, I'm supposed to give it to the school first, and they disseminate it usually when I'm public paid. So
Well,
yes.
I meant more like assistive technology goals, what we have to accomplish, you know, are those different with expectations of what the school
Yeah.
can actually do?
I don't. I can only speak for myself.
Psychologists do that, I think, if they expect there's going to be a continuing relationship with that with the school and the evaluator. So I think sometimes the evaluators go, oh, wow, I live in this town and I want to continue to get, these evaluation payments for, from this local school district. So I'm going to kind of give them what they want to see, which is not a whole lot of recommendations that cost money. So, yeah.
I would go back on one other thing you were saying, make sure you pick the right person. I can tell you of a case, I remember back a few years ago where a parent picked an independent evaluator, and they basically toed the district's line inappropriately. But you know what? That's who they picked for their IEE. So and that happened on the stand. Let's put it this way: it didn't go well for the parents in the final analysis. So you do want to be careful.
The question I have with IEEs is when parents are granted a number of IEEs at the same time, and so they may have selected a separate speech person, an OT, and maybe just selected you, the psychological. One thing that occurs to me is if those were internal evaluations, not IEEs, it's kind of easier to facilitate a team approach to the evaluation to some degree. You have recommendations for like what that coordination should or shouldn't look like in an IEE scenario.
Well, and I ask parents, I usually ask up front, how many IEEs are we looking at? And so that I know, and then I ask, who did you pick for your evaluator? And will you give me consent to talk to them? Sometimes we're at different points. Like sometimes by the time they get to me, because my schedule, they may already have the speech done and the OT, and so they're able to give me those, which is great. But I do ask for that ability to speak to them because like a lot of times with kids on the spectrum, I want to know about their pragmatics, but I have to, if they're already giving a speech about outside, I can't necessarily do my own pragmatic assessment. So then I need to know what they saw so that I can then make sure, okay, I've got this down. So yes, ask them to make sure that they can speak to or provide them the opportunity to speak to the other IEE providers. If you've already got reports, get them to us. So I'll review everything. I want everything. I want back, if I can get back 5 years and it's not 400 pounds, because I want to see what's going on with this student, not just what I see.
Or on that same point, I had a case of a child that was a nonverbal one, really involved. And frankly, harder to assess. And so when we had the assessment done by the district, I asked it to be a rehab assessment where everybody could come together and then do it, because I want to open the door for us to do a rehab assessment. A rehab assessment means you can have other evaluators and at the same time, because if you have you're trying to do a psychological eval, you need to have a speech pathologist, you need to have an assistant diagnosis, you may even need to have an OT available.
We haven't figured out how to bill for that. Trust me, my girlfriend and I are trying our best. We just haven't figured out how to get everyone paid properly. So it's hard. It is hard, but it'd be great because, like, I'll tell you, the autism evaluations done as a multidisciplinary team. I miss that. I absolutely. And so when I can consult with the other people doing it, I want to because I want to hear I want to see what they saw too. But yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. So.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. If anybody needs a certificate of attendance for whatever reason, I've got copies of them here, so. You know, you can just put your name in. I'm not a go-show body.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad you came. I mean,
Yeah, I'm a sure I'm not. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah.